Today we are covering 6 major developments shaking the geopolitical landscape. Ukraine is striking new arms deals with Gulf nations and offering to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Trump is threatening to bomb Iranian desalination plants if no deal is reached. Thousands of U.S. Army paratroopers are now deploying to the Middle East as the operation against Iran intensifies. Russia has recruited up to 15,000 Cuban citizens to fight in Ukraine, according to Ukrainian intelligence. Spain has formally denied the United States the use of its airspace for Iran war operations. And Trump is now openly declaring that Cuba will be his next target. These are the stories. Let us get into it. The war against Iran is no longer a regional crisis. It is reshaping alliances, trade routes, and military logistics on a global scale, and the events of this week make that clearer than ever. Start with Ukraine, because the move that President Volodymyr Zelensky just made is one that would have seemed almost unthinkable just a year ago. Ukraine, a country fighting for its survival on its eastern front, is now positioning itself as an arms exporter and a maritime security partner for the wealthiest nations in the Arabian Gulf. On March 30th, Zelensky announced that new agreements signed with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar will see Ukraine supply weapons and defense technology to those governments, including systems capable of helping to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Think about what that means. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important choke point for global energy markets. In peacetime, roughly 20% of all the oil traded on the planet passes through that narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman. When Iran closed the strait in response to joint U.S. and Israeli military strikes, global oil prices spiked immediately. The economic shockwave was felt from Tokyo to London, and now Ukraine is offering the Gulf states its drone technology and its experience in keeping maritime corridors open, drawing directly from what it learned operating in the Black Sea against Russian naval pressure. This is not a small diplomatic footnote. Zelensky explicitly said that Ukraine had never had agreements of this kind with this region before. The deals are expected to last at least 10 years with each country and include the export of Ukrainian naval drones, electronic warfare systems, and software. In exchange, the Gulf nations will provide energy support, including diesel and other critical supplies that Ukraine desperately needs right now. Ukraine's Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov, is still in the region continuing negotiations, with Bahrain and Oman also expressing interest. This is Ukraine transforming its wartime expertise into geopolitical leverage, and it is working. Now let us talk about what is happening on the American side, because the pressure campaign against Iran has entered a new and far more dangerous phase. President Donald Trump, writing on social media, renewed his threat to destroy a long list of Iranian civilian infrastructure if a deal is not reached quickly. He specifically named Iran's electricity generation plants, oil wells, the island of Karg, which handles roughly 90% of Iranian oil exports, and, perhaps most alarmingly, all of Iran's desalination plants. Desalination facilities are not military targets. They are the systems that convert seawater into drinkable water for millions of Iranian civilians. Threatening to destroy them is not a military tactic. Legal experts have been blunt about this. Yusra Swady, an assistant professor of international law at the University of Manchester, stated that this threat reinforces a climate of impunity around collective punishment in times of war. Ray Jarar, advocacy director at the human rights organization Dawn, called it classic collective punishment and a war crime. The Fourth Geneva Convention explicitly prohibits collective sanctions and all measures of intimidation against civilian populations. The White House, when pressed on this, said the administration would always act within the limits of the law. But the gap between that statement and what Trump is threatening publicly is stark, and the international community is watching. Trump has also extended his deadline multiple times. He first gave Iran 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz on March 21st. He then extended it by 5 days, then again to April 6th. Iranian officials have acknowledged receiving a 15-point ceasefire proposal from Washington through intermediaries, but multiple senior Iranian figures have denied any direct negotiations are taking place. The situation remains on a knife edge. Meanwhile, the military buildup in the region continues at a pace that leaves no room for ambiguity about American intentions. Thousands of soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division, one of the most elite rapid deployment units in the U.S. Army, based at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, have begun arriving in the Middle East. They join approximately 2,500 Marines who arrived over the weekend, along with additional Navy personnel, special operations forces, and logistical assets. American officials speaking on background confirmed the deployment but declined to specify exact destinations. What makes this deployment significant beyond raw numbers is what these forces could be used for. Internal Trump administration discussions, as reported by Reuters, have included the possibility of a ground operation to seize the island of Karg, the extraction of highly enriched uranium from Iranian facilities, and ensuring safe passage of oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz using ground forces positioned along the Iranian coastline. Since operations began on February 28th, the United States has struck more than 11,000 targets in Iran. More than 300 American soldiers have been wounded and 13 have died in what the Pentagon is calling Operation Epic Fury. Any expansion to ground forces inside Iranian territory would represent a dramatic escalation with unpredictable consequences, and polling shows that public support in the United States for this campaign is far from unanimous. If you want to stay informed on events like these as they unfold, subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications. We cover the stories that matter with the depth they deserve every time. Now, here is a detail that most Western coverage is underreporting. Russia is actively recruiting Cuban citizens to fight in Ukraine, and Ukrainian intelligence believes the number could be as high as 15,000 people. Andriy Cherniak, a representative of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, made clear that Kyiv does not view these Cuban fighters as a separate military force on the battlefield. Many were recruited through deception or under coercive conditions. But the more important point, according to Ukrainian intelligence, is that this is primarily a propaganda operation for domestic Russian audiences. By showing that citizens from other countries are fighting alongside Russian forces, the Kremlin attempts to frame the war not as Russian aggression, but as a broader international cause with genuine support from parts of what it calls the civilized world. The human cost for those Cuban individuals, many of whom apparently did not fully understand what they were signing up for, is a separate tragedy. Forbes had reported earlier that up to 25,000 Cubans may have been involved, and Russia's calculus is cold. Foreign fighters' deaths do not generate domestic political backlash inside Russia, and the state does not owe compensation to their families. Back in Europe, Spain has drawn a firm line. The Spanish government confirmed this week that it has formally denied the United States the use of Spanish airspace for any operations related to the war against Iran. This applies not only to aircraft flying from Spanish soil, but also to American planes stationed in third countries like the United Kingdom and France that might need to transit through Spanish-controlled airspace. Spain had also been approached about hosting U.S. strategic bombers, including B-52s and B-1s, at bases in southern Spain, but Madrid shut that down once it became clear those aircraft would be used in operations that lack international legal authorization. Defense Minister Margarita Robles was unambiguous. The use of Spanish bases and airspace for Iran-related war operations is not authorized. Foreign Minister José Manuel Alvarez said Spain will not do anything that could escalate tensions in the Middle East, and warned that he is more concerned about the situation now than he was a month ago. He explicitly raised the possibility of a mass migration wave from Iran toward Europe and cautioned that the conflict risks becoming what he called perpetual war. Trump had threatened trade consequences for Spain's refusal to cooperate, but Spain's economy minister Carlos Cuerpo said trade relations with the United States remain exactly as they were before the conflict, noting that those ties are governed at the European Union level and are not affected by individual member state military decisions. And then there is Cuba. President Trump, speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One on Sunday, declared that Cuba will be the next target after Iran. He called Cuba a mess, said it is a country in crisis, and predicted it will fail in a short time. He also said the United States would be there to help, directing that comment specifically at Cuban Americans. When asked about reports that a Russian oil tanker had been allowed to reach Cuba, Trump said he had no problem with that, reasoning that the Cuban people need to survive and that one shipment of oil will not change the trajectory of a government he clearly views as already collapsing. His words were matter of fact and dismissive, the posture of someone who sees an endgame already written rather than a decision still being made. Whether that posture reflects actual strategic planning or political messaging aimed at domestic audiences remains an open question. What ties all of these stories together is a single underlying reality. The war against Iran has become the gravitational center of global geopolitics right now, and every actor on the world stage is being forced to position itself in relation to it. Ukraine is leveraging it to build new alliances. Russia is using it as cover to accelerate recruitment and expand its influence in the Caribbean. Spain is using it to reaffirm a foreign policy grounded in international law. The Gulf states are signing 10-year defense agreements. And the United States is deploying tens of thousands of additional troops while its president publicly threatens to destroy water infrastructure for 90 million people. This is not a peripheral conflict. It is reshaping the architecture of international relations in real time. What do you think is the most likely outcome here? Is a deal with Iran possible before the April 6th deadline? Or are we heading toward an even larger escalation? Leave your perspective in the comments. This conversation matters, and your analysis is part of it.